A scan is not a lead. Event marketers, if you're listening to this, coming back from shows saying that you generated millions of pipeline from XYZ scans, it's not a lead. People want to get to know you. I love the quote that people love to buy, but they hate to be sold. But when you think of a brand, you think of more than just pipeline.
We could have a whole series called Tips and Tricks from Kristen.
Let's rename the podcast. You want to be a host, Kristen?
More will come out of my brain later, guys.
What's up, networkers? Welcome back to another episode of the NetWorker podcast, your home for all the best insights and advice on all things conferences, trade shows, and networking.
We're your hosts, Bryce Alsten and Ryan Alco. Join us as we network with events industry professionals to discuss the art of building meaningful connections that fuel your business growth and unlock opportunity.
Now, without further ado, put on your conference badge and let's dive in to today's episode. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Kristen Koenig to the podcast. Kristen is the GM for RingCentral Events, where she leads the global business strategy of the organization. With over 15 years of experience across the events, hospitality, and tech industries, she's held key roles as head of partnerships, director of global sales, and director of enterprise sales at major organizations. Kristen's impressive career has earned her numerous accolades, including being named one of Smart Meetings magazine Top 25 Influential Women in Meetings and Events, and Meetings and Conventions magazine Top 15 Go-Getter Young Professionals. Beyond her leadership roles, Kristen is also an executive coach and mentor, where she shares her knowledge with others to empower them in their careers. We had an incredible conversation with her, filled with great insights for go-to-market teams that are focused on in-person conference strategies. And we're excited to share it with you all. So with that, let's dive in. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's awesome to have you. This is going to be a great conversation. Before we dive in, I want to give some context in terms of what enabled all of this to be possible. And so you and I met at the HubSpot Inbound Conference, and I got introduced to you, and we started talking about lead capture at events. And very soon into that conversation, it became clear to me this was a space you had a lot of insight in and a lot of experience in. And I was learning so much from you that two things became pretty apparent. The first was, number one, this could be a much longer discussion. And number two, this could be a conversation that I think a lot of other people who also go to events could really benefit from. And so as Bryce and I were ramping up this podcast, we knew that you would be an amazing guest to have on. And so this is sort of that full circle moment, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Bryce. I appreciate it very much.
To kick things off, Kristen, can you tell us a little bit about the current role that you're in and the current organization that you're a part of?
Yeah, so I'm currently the GM for RingCentral Events, formerly Hopin. So I lead the strategy overall of our business unit. So directly leading sales, customer success, support, and partnerships. And then really the rest of the product engineering, marketing, and just overall go-to-market strategy of our solution. So that's my current role. My background is 15 years within the event, travel, and hospitality technology industry. So I worked and was one of Cvent's first team members on the enterprise team over 5 years. And then from there, I went to a partner of theirs, World Travel, where I worked at and led their business development team for events. And then after that, I went to work at Freeman, which is the largest general contractor in the world for events and really exhibitions, and led the digital partnership side of the house. And that was really fun because I looked at and learned 100+ different technologies that we reviewed within the space, and also learned a lot about the in-person technology and in-person services. So what was cool about all these experiences is while they were all very different, they're all generally in the same industry, and it really allowed me to understand things in a different light and every different angle and perspective.
Yes. The in-person technology is a really interesting space, especially at these events. Given all that experience you just described, it's no surprise that our conversation initially at Inbound was as good as it was. Kristen, the general discussion today is basically going to support one main question. And we like to ask this question right at the beginning. And what that is essentially, how do you define success at an event as an exhibitor? And what does that look like?
I love this question because there's so many ways to define success. And there's so many as someone who's supplying the budget for my entire team to attend these events, depending if it's in person or we're doing our own and, supporting others, or if it's virtual, we really look at a few different things. I think number one is pipeline. And pipeline is a big one for everyone, and that's kind of cookie cutter. I think the other thing that we look for is how many customers do we connect with? And I think that is usually missed by a lot of companies because they think about just going to events to get pipeline. But in my opinion, if you're not engaging with your customers at an event and understanding that metric, you're losing out on that longevity of a relationship. And so I always like to have, whether it's a happy hour or some type of special event for those clients, because you want to connect with them just as much as you want the new business. And so what I see kind of problems in the industry, and we're not onto that question, but you can't just look at the acquisition revenue. You also have to look at the customers that you connect with and the amount of them. And so then the last metric, which is really hard to measure, but I've measured it in a lot of forms, which we can talk about, is brand awareness. So I go and attend events and really understand, how is our brand going to be recognized at this event? So it's not about just showing up and having a booth, which I think most to all companies do that. But what is the activation? What is the actual plan to attend? And I think this comes from, seeing so many different types of companies exhibit at events from Freeman and learning about all the cool activations. It's not about just the sponsorship, oh, your logo's here or your brand's here. I'm like, how can we look different in the market and event? And what is going to generate buzz? And does that, from metrics perspective, translate to social activations, which is a lot of the new generation coming up in the workforce? To summarize, it's about acquisition, customer connections, brand awareness. Those are the main three things. I'm sure there's more, but those are kind of the main three buckets that I look at.
Interesting. So if we break that down, I think pipeline is probably the most obvious to measure, right? Because you put them into your CRM and now you're going to track them through the customer cycle, through ideally to, close one, close loss, or whatever it may be. Can you talk about how you measure the other two, customer engagement and brand awareness? Because those are a little bit more obscure, right? And I think that's an interesting topic.
Yes. So customer engagement, I measure it from a couple different angles. Number
Hmm.
one is, did they stop by and have a discussion with my team? And I think another mistake that a lot of exhibitors or companies make is they just really send their new business team. One thing I learned from my CVID experience, and I love that from their leadership team, is they send all different parts of their company to events. And that to me makes you see the company in a different light. So I always send a mixture of new business partnerships as well as customer success and leadership. And, sometimes even product. Product can go as well. We're looking into that for 2025. And I think that's really important because you get all these different people learning about what you do within your industry, first and foremost, but also that it's more than just sales. Like, we care about the customer. We care about the journey that you take. You will interact with all these departments. And so it's really important for customers and new customers to see that. So I think that's super important across the board. So engagement with customers, having meetings with these people. And then also, are they attending beyond just coming to your booth? Are they attending our after hours event or lunch and learn, depending on what we want to do? Because for some events, we might just do like a meetup and a happy hour, which is really easy. And so I love to understand, okay, which customers came to that and which ones come to the booth. Were they the same? Because we did have customers do both. And so to me, I look at that as that's an engaged customer. They're coming not only to the happy hour to meet our team and see us, but then they're coming also to the booth to learn more about our roadmap or meet the rest of the team they didn't get to meet at the happy hour. So I think that's super important because you can kind of dial in, just like any digital event. The more engagement points, the more meetups that happen with a customer, the more engaged that customer is with you and what you're doing. So I look at it that way. And then the other thing that I look at is, does that transcend into different expansion ideas? And so, we take diligent notes post event. And so sometimes it's either a new department or maybe it's something that we didn't uncover that they were having issues with. So it's like that deeper level. So it's less data, that's more qualitative, but the first two are more quantitative data. So that's customer engagement.
Yeah.
The last one that you mentioned, which is brand. Oh, do you?
I was going to say, before we move to brand, I think there's some interesting things to talk about there, Ryan. I'm sure you've got a bunch of questions, but two things for me. One is you like spoke to my heart when you talked about bring all of the other people from your company to the event, not only to show your customer that this is who we are. This is not just our sales team, but this is our brand. This is our culture. But it also it brought me right back to the Popple team's first time at CES, when we had just rolled out our enterprise teams platform, and we just brought everybody, people who had never stood there and done sales before ever. And by the end of this conference, all of us understood Popple so much better. We knew like how to describe it succinctly, quickly, how to get people from, cold and questioning to warm and booking a demo. And so, like, I think, yeah, that is just so fascinating. If you have anything to add to that one.
No, you hit it on the head. I love the emphasis, Kristen, that you mentioned on learning. That's like one of the things that's core to us as Popple is to always be learning, and to have that curiosity. And there's really nothing like going. And the reason why going to conferences is actually so amazing for Popple is because that's where our product and the use case lives. So not only are we learning, just from talking to our customers there, but we're actually learning from seeing it in use. And so it's like doubly valuable for us to be doing that. And I love that you kind of touch on that as well. And you see that as something that's also really helpful.
Yeah, and what Bryce said, it's the culture. And I think going back to my point that I mentioned a couple of times, when people just say, look at your company as like, there's tons of people around this booth and they want to sell me something.
Hmm.
When you make it more about like who you are and that curiosity that you just mentioned, Ryan, it changes the conversation because people want to get to know you. I love the quote that people love to buy, but they hate to be sold. I think there's a lot of great platforms and services and companies around the world. But when you think of a brand, and that's going into my third point, you think of more than just pipeline. You think of it in a holistic sense. And that's what makes me really excited about this industry and just overall meetings and webinars, events, and this kind of connection that events, travel, and hospitality connect across the world.
Yeah. So there's so many different threads we can take this in, but we'd like to sort of approach this whole kind of discussion in terms of pre-event, during event, and post-event sort of actions and experiences. And so with that kind of pre-event in mind, you mentioned, Kristen, bringing a bunch of different team members to the event and interacting with different types of customers, whether that's new customers or maybe existing customers. And so can you talk about kind of what goes into the experience before the event for whether it's training these different types of people across different departments, or maybe it's getting an understanding of which of your customers are going to be there, whether that's existing or new, and kind of what that pre-event process looks like for you.
So it all starts with, and I do this always within Q3, Q4 going into the following year. Like our annual planning is already complete of what events I'm budgeting for 2025. So I start there because everyone asks me, are you going to be at this event? And honestly, like 2024, when I took over the team, was kind of the trial year. Like where do we want to be? Where do we want to represent? Where does a product fit best? And analyzing that in the market. So it really starts in that forefront. So we already know the events that we're going to attend next year. And I think for me, when I go into the planning process that you just mentioned in the next phase, I already had kickoffs with my event marketer. And it's great because we are software at a larger organization now. And I get to have feedback with my internal event marketing team, who's now not only my internal customer, but I'm also their internal customer. So it's so funny. So I actually had a call the other week with our strategic events leader. And she was like, what do you want this to be for 2025? Because you start very early, especially for a big tech conference like HubSpot, making sure like what activations do you want to set up? How do you want to make them feel? Is there going to be a launch around that event? So it's the strategy going into it. And then also the training for the team. Obviously, you can't get into tactical stuff, until you understand like, okay, what's going to be released around that time because the market changes in the world every single quarter usually. So, you can't really go to the tactical point, but we usually have a timeline that we go down, and we always have a training for the team that one, everyone's sticking to the same talk track. Two, they understand the market buzz. So competitive intelligence, what's happening in the wider industry and the world, and then also making sure that the products and the services and anything that we're doing, they're up to speed on. So for this HubSpot, as an example, we launched our new HubSpot deeper integration at the event. So everyone was trained on that prior so that when the PR went out, everyone could talk about that at the booth. And that should be cookie cutter, but I don't think a lot of, companies and some of the big tech do this really, really well, but the smaller ones don't, where you time things well with an event so you can generate that buzz and then everyone being trained on it. So that's one thing that we did really well. And then also connections pre-event, not forcing meetings. We encourage meetings, but what is going to attract people to your booth? So there's a lot of things that we go into the process, but we have a full timeline, just to summarize.
Yeah. So it sounds like the preparation starts at least 3 months in advance.
Well, at least way more.
Yeah.
We're talking now, like I had a meeting now for next year's HubSpot, which is in September. So that's how far planned in advance. Especially last year, we planned it about a quarter or two in advance, which I don't think was enough time. It was about 90 days. And for this one going into it, I want to make sure that we are very well ahead of the game so that we can actually have a big impact.
Yeah. I'm curious, are you using any tools, softwares, platforms to prepare for these events? Or are you using your own
Yeah.
platform?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say across the board, I can't share specific platforms, but
Yeah.
AI is coming into the event marketing world. And so we are using our own platform that supports it, but we also are using a lot of tool sets within the, I could say marketing space, less event marketing, but more marketing space that allows you to really help with task management, project management, and so forth. So and then also repurposing of content in different. So there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, but we use a mixture of our own and then a lot of other ones that connect to that MarTech stack.
And
Yeah.
how many people are involved in this planning process? Sounds like you're generally leading that.
Yeah.
How many other people are thinking about this as intently as you are 3, 4, 5 months before the event even starts?
I would say at minimum three. So I I don't like to call myself as like the main leader of it. I think a team usually leads it, but event marketer. Once the budget's secure, you have one strategic events leader that leads it. It's more so I'm helping with the strategy. But to be honest, my sales leader and my partnerships leader, they're really like hand in hand with what we want to do there because we want to make sure that one, they're bought into how we're showing up and the decisions that are going to be made. HubSpot is really big with partnerships. And so, when I've been on, other conversations about HubSpot inbound specifically and how we all met, it's about partnerships, it's about connections. And so they're heavily involved in that process. And I am someone who I love bringing more people in than necessary. And obviously not too many, but a small intimate group so we can make the right decisions and get buy-in.
Yeah, definitely important to have the right group with you there, especially given that you're planning so far out and you want to make sure that you're doing the right things to set your team up for success. One of the things that we're really curious about, Kristen, when you're bringing your team to these events and you have these goals of generating pipeline and of engaging potential customers, are you doing any form of incentivizing to your team at these events to help them get those higher numbers of pipeline or to really go above and beyond to engage with the customer?
Yeah, this is really great question. So I love to put this on my first company that I worked for. I learned a lot when in their management style, and I've taken that into, my subsequent companies and career. But at minimum, you have to have a certain amount of appointments to go. Since we're a newer technology in the market, that's still things that we are, upping as we continue. But incentivizing is like, if you hit your goals, you should be able to go to the show. So those are things that I want to keep doing and keep installing. And then also when I was at, that organization, they had to present to the leadership team. So this is actually a fun story, but I was right out of college, 22 years old, and CVent was going to exhibit at the Global Business Travel Association. It was like, I did a lot of research. There was tons of influencers, like industry leaders that I wanted to meet that are actually humbly now friends of mine and have mentored me. But I really wanted to go to that event. So I worked really hard on setting the right amount of appointments, going over my goal. And I was one of the first younger members of the team that got to go to GBTA at the time. And I was a BDR and enterprise business development representative. And I pitched to those leaders going to the show. I demoed the product and pitched. And then that got me to go to the show, which was really fun. So I want to keep on doing that. It's a really good tip and trick because I think some organizations just send, oh, this is a really good rep or this is the best person.
Mm,
And I think that
yep.
is very short sighted because they might not be the best fit just because they're the highest performer. There could be other members of the team that, are more introverted and they show up well and they actually nail their goals, the meeting goals, and they nail their presentation and actually is so much better than maybe someone who's like a top performer. But then we have situations all the time in my past companies where they never hit their meeting goal, but they were a top performer day to day, but they weren't prepped to go to the show. So would you want to send that person or would you want to have that person who actually has meetings and actually can demo the product the best and more technical? So it just depends on what you want. That's a really good story because I always take it into my subsequent company.
Yeah, I think that story really makes it obvious why your career has progressed into what it is, right? Like you went there, the incentive itself, as you mentioned, for many people is to go to the show just to attend. It's not to like get a bonus because you captured X number of leads while you're there. It's like, hey, this is exciting and everyone wants to get out of the office and go to the biggest trade shows in the world. So that's cool.
I truly did it because I wanted to progress in my career and I wanted to learn more. And I knew that
Yeah.
being with my executives, being with a wider team, and being a part of a bigger mission, which was the largest show at the time for our company, was something that I wanted to connect with. And so it wasn't just about like the sales or beating people or being that competitive person that I am, which is true, but I really wanted to be a part of something and cement my career in this industry. And that going to that show was actually a very pivotal moment for me because I did seek out those people and I said, "Hey, are you, if Kevin Iwamoto is listening, hey, are you Kevin? Like, really admire you in the industry." And we started talking and, you just meet these certain individuals and they kind of take you under your wing because you're so passionate about what you want to do. But that is the biggest reason.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to ask, but you basically already answered it. How do you double down on these events and find opportunities for mentorship and friendship? And it sounds like just being passionate, doing your homework beforehand, and then being brave enough to go talk to strangers is really the name of the game.
It is, Bryce. That's a great question. I even, younger, people I mentor throughout the industry, and this is why I think Ryan, you and I gravitated towards each other. I love people who are curious. They do not want to sell me, but they are generally curious about me, and they're generally curious about how my career has blossomed and how and I think holistically, I want to give back in ways that people have given back to me. And so when people come into my LinkedIn inbox or at the show, I generally love to talk to those individuals because you can sell people all day, but that genuine connection of your background and constantly learning, because even though Ryan works at this company and he has this job to do, we're connecting on a deeper level to be like, what makes you tick and how can I help you and who can I connect you with? Because going back to my quote is people love to buy but hate to be sold. Connection matters and there's tons of great products in the world, but the people at these companies matter. And I think customer success has not been great at most organizations. And it's such a big, big area that I'm focusing on in our teams and moving forward.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that stood out to me most about you, Kristen, is, obviously that event and a lot of the other ones I've been to, I talked to a lot of people about lead capture and their experience, and you were one that stood out in your passion for it. Like you really understood each of the different sort of parts of the lead capture flow life cycle, and you were giving me insights into how it could be improved, which very, very few people go to that level of detail and sort of insight on. So yeah, I know, and I could genuinely feel that. So that was amazing. I want to take this into sort of like the meat of the discussion here and move into experiences and processes at the event and talk about the big pipeline generator. Let's talk about lead capture. So, Kristen, how do you see lead capture in its sort of most effective way What are the tools that you think are best at doing this? Just bring us into kind of your mind on what a successful lead capture process looks like.
Yeah, and I'd say tools and best practices, whether that's soft skills in addition to softwares or anything you guys may be using.
Yeah. So first, I want to say a big fallacy in the industry, or, I wouldn't even say fallacy, but like a metric that I can't stand is a scan is not a lead. And event marketers, if you're listening to this, coming back from shows saying that you generated millions of pipeline from XYZ scans, it's not a lead. There's scans and there's leads and there's qualified opportunities. And then the rest of your sales stages. They're contacts and then leads who are actually leads. And so what we do, and I want to say this before we go into tool sets and soft skills, because it's important, is when you go through all of your scans, some of them are going to be vendors from your team. They're just scanning people, and then partners, and then customers, and then acquisition. When we come back from shows, and when I've done this at other companies, you really need to dial in of the category of those individuals. And sometimes the event marketer does not know those. So you have to help them. If you're a sales leader listening to this call or go to market leader, it is your job as the leader of your entire department to look through and make sure that this is actually accurate. And I can't tell you enough how so many go-to-market leaders don't look at that. But what I think is very important, so that's the first one, is a scan is not a lead. And you can put that everywhere.
Yeah.
That's our magic moment, Kristen. That's going to be the beginning of the episode for sure.
You need to segment. You need to segment and put these into cohorts so you can truly understand the ROI or the ROE, the return on event, which many people say is happening. So I would say from a tool set perspective, I think the event industry, I know the event industry has had a lead retrieval problem in the market for decades. And it has evolved a little bit, but honestly, it's still archaic. And Ryan, you and I have talked about this with what you're doing at Popple, et cetera, because it's been relying on having this big badge with a round your wrist and having a device to scan it. But the device is expensive, and organizers, the technology company charges the organizers charges the person. And most of the pricing model within the market is for every device you get or every scan is expensive. So if you have a big booth and you have 20 people at the booth, they don't want 20 different lead retrieval devices. So one, the pricing model needs to be disruptive, which we started doing. Disrupted is like companies need to purchase, and the better the show is, you want to make them successful, the more people need to be able to scan leads, because your team should be dispersed. They shouldn't be hanging out with each other. That is also a tip. They shouldn't be hanging out with each other. I tell this to my team and ask them this. I go over there, go into this session. You guys all go to different sessions and meet different people. And that's also something I learned at my first company is you shouldn't be talking to your team members. Yeah, in some way, shape, or form, and you can go in a pack to like lunch and stuff, but you should all sit at different tables. And believe me, you can leave 3 tables at lunch and connect with 5 to 10 different companies. And some of those are the most valuable leads. The most valuable lead that I've gotten from an event is I sat down next to 5 people and all my team members were split up, and I got 2 hot leads from that because I was asking them questions about their life. So I think soft skills, this is going to the soft skills versus tool sets, but soft skills is having a conversation, being genuinely curious, and being able to hold your own, not with your team. Because when you come in a pack, people are a little bit more intimidated because you're 2 or 3 people from the same company. Obviously, you want to talk to me if I have a big logo across my badge. So that's a soft skill, which, generally be curious and connect and move about the space. I think from a tool set perspective, which I mentioned is archaic, the lead retrieval devices just are not the future. Most companies in the technology space right now are doing mobile apps, which is okay, but still the pricing model is inhibitive to that. But I believe the future is really having that text messaging to contact management and making sure that is going back into the overall CRM. So right now, it's still not going back and forth in the way that it should be for every single tech company. Even though tech companies say they do, there's still problems within that space of how you rate the leads, how it goes back, who has access, and the pricing. So there's still tool sets that need to get better. So there's nothing specific. I would say all of them collectively. It hasn't been great within the market. right now.
Makes sense. You mentioned text message to CRM. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah.
What you mean by
So
that?
I think text messaging or SMS is going to really take over across the board because you don't want a business from a security perspective. You don't want every contact saved on someone's personal device. So that there's also a security hurdle that the collective industry needs to get over with that specific one and connect that together. But I think text messaging or SMS within business communications is getting a lot stronger. In my personal opinion, the future of lead retrieval at a show, it's around how do you have that downloaded, contact management without it going back to the user's device, because that's when you get into security. The text messaging is important because if, let's just say, I want to add a note, I have to go back into the app. Sometimes it logs me out. This is many companies, not ours, but the trade show applications out there. You have to go back in. Sometimes you can't log you in. You can't re-edit your notes. It already is submitted. So I think there should be something in the future where, maybe every lead that is logged, you can text add different elements. So let's just say that person comes back around. Instead of rescanning them as another scan, can you just add in additional notes? So obviously, I'm just speaking some ideas right now, but there should be more that's happening with that connection and with texts and SMS and communication versus just, oh, it's an application's going back to the business, but some type of message that's connected to the technology.
So you mentioned, what's that?
It's faster.
Faster. Gotcha. I want to bring it back to something you mentioned before, and that's customer engagement. Sounds like customer touch points, right? So you see them at the booth, and they go to one of the speaking gigs, and you talk to them at lunch. Does this tie into what you're talking about? I'd want to update based on that. And tactically, how are you measuring these touch points and the customer engagement at the event?
Yeah, great question. So for the customer engagement, kind of what I mentioned before, it's do they stop by your booth? And then also,
Hmm.
do you have a conversation at an after hours event? But you can also have a conversation with them in passing,
Yeah.
a session or a sponsor. But in most applications right now for lead retrieval, if I scan their badge and want to re-add notes, you can't go back in and edit them. Sometimes you have to scan them 3 times, which then creates duplicates in your report, and then you have
Mm.
to merge them together. So yes, that's great for customer engagement that I engaged with this person 3 times, but it's skewing your data. So, in my personal opinion, what you should do is have one contact and then you merge all the interactions you have with that contact later on. So, if my team scanned them once, twice, 3 times, and maybe they connected with 5 different people across the show, you should know, did they meet them in a session? Did you meet them at a happy hour? Like, what is the location? What's the construct that you talked about? Because if 5 team members met with one customer and they had all these great conversations, that's not 5 scans. That's one scan meeting with 5 different people at 5 different times with different conversations. And to me, that should be like a higher engagement score versus
Yeah,
it's skewing the
absolutely.
data that it thinks that it's meeting with 3 or 5 people. So does that make sense? I think the data and the end result is not what's actually happening at a show.
Yeah, it's not painting the full
It's
picture.
not painting the full picture. And this kind of goes into brand awareness because there's those pieces of what you're capturing. But for brand awareness, you are looking at metrics when it comes to social engagement and how many, that is when you can actually say scans because people are going to stop by your booth when you're creating a splash. So that's when I look at scans. That's when I look at social. Those are the things I look at. I don't look at scans from a pipeline perspective. I look at them from more of a brand awareness. So I've attended a past event with past companies, and we've looked at scans. And sometimes people stop by because they generally just want to know what you do, but they're not a buyer. They're not an ideal customer profile. And you kind of have to look at that lens. So scans could be more brand awareness and social engagement. And then the actual pipeline is just leads to opportunity. So who's actually qualified, who's a buyer, not a vendor, not potentially a partner, who's actually going to direct buy versus indirect buy.
Yeah. So to me, it sounds like the core of what we're talking about here is essentially context is key.
Yes.
It's the context and knowing how many different touch points we've had with this customer, which different members on our team have engaged with this customer, and having that context be accurately and correctly associated with the contact instead of just a bunch of different instances of that contact?
100%. That's a really good summation, better than what I just mentioned. But across the board, it's going back to the cohort and segmentation that I mentioned before. You really want that curated experience versus having so many different data points and trying to understand it. This is where I think AI in lead retrieval is going to take over, is understanding the data and understanding this breakdown of the data versus, oh, we got 300 scans. That was so sick. And looking at it in that linearity versus going the next second or third level deeper. And then you can really truly understand those engagement points.
Yeah. So, and I guess I'm curious, you mentioned, Kristen, how that's not really the ultimate conversion. It's more about these qualified leads. And is the ultimate conversion essentially just capturing more qualified leads, or is it a step beyond that? Is it getting these qualified leads to book a demo, or is it then, are you looking at revenue numbers, attach those qualified leads down the line? What is sort of like that ultimate form of conversion you're looking at there?
So I've always looked at it at every company throughout my career as that true conversion to the end. Because you could say, and a lot of companies do this within, the perception versus reality. And this is actually, if you're a go-to-market leader listening to this, separate from the marketing team, your marketers want to really partner with you. And if you are leading it up to the marketer to understand your data and your customers, that is an issue. You need to partner with your marketing team. This is a very, very good point because I see a lot of sales leaders thinking an event did really well. And I see this at every company I've ever worked at. And they go and they say, oh my God, that was such an amazing event. We got hundreds of people to our booth and our happy hour was packed. And they'd say all these numbers because that's what they feel, right? They feel that because they were there. But when you look at the end result, you could generate a lot of buzz because people know your brand. People know your name. They want to go to the hottest, happy hour on the block. They want to see the biggest booth in the area. Is that actually attracting the right people to get there? That could be great for brand awareness to one of my 3 points, but is that actually generating the pipeline? You could assimilate that later. But in my opinion of what you just asked me, Ryan, it's more than that. You can have the smallest booth at the show, big versus large, doesn't really matter. And let's just say you have one really, really, really strong lead. And that lead closes into a 6-figure deal. That can blow away your budget just from that one individual that you met. But you could meet hundreds of leads and nothing generates. So that's what I mean. And I've attended hundreds of shows throughout my career, especially when I was at Freeman, since they were my customers, trade shows were my clients. And the amount of people that sales leadership is not supporting and partnering as well as they could with marketing, that's where the issue lies. So I encourage a lot of sales leaders listening to this to partner with marketing, understand your data beyond the perception. And that's where you have qualitative versus quantitative. And believe me, maybe you make a decision going to an event where you're like, we want that brand awareness, we want the buzz. And that seems great to us. But don't just think that the number of people that show up generates the ROI.
Yeah, that's deep stuff. And I think that takes us to the final part of the trade show journey, which is after the event. I want to give us a quick time check here. I know we're coming up on time and we've got a special bonus round coming up. So I want to make sure we give that the attention it deserves. But you already talked about it. It's attribution and merging of teams, communication. But tell us about after event, mechanically, what does measuring success look like after you pack up your bags and get back to the office?
Yeah. Well, I tell my team, if you have something that is hot, you're following up within 24 hours. So we do have a post-event strategy, and I've done this at every company I've worked at, is post-event strategies. You need to be very quick to follow because I think one issue, which is what we're discussing today with lead retrieval, is the marketing team gets it to the sales team way too late. Because what happens is it's not the marketing team, it's the technology and the show organizer. The show organizer is getting it to the teams late or the exhibitors late. And then the exhibitors have to process the data within their systems and tech stack. Sometimes it's Salesforce and Marketo. And then they strategize on the strategy to send out notes to all these people. And then they actually send it out for bigger companies to the right AE or region that has to go through or CSM. And then it makes it to the sales team. This could take sometimes 2 weeks where you wait for the lead retrieval. And then you go back. You need to be fast. So I tell all my team members, when you have someone, you need to send them an email, irregardless, especially the sales leader, to say, let's set up a demo. We will get you connected to the right person and process this instantaneously. That's something that lead retrieval is missing, is how quickly can that process happen? Because you cannot wait as a show organizer if you're taking too long, because I've experienced this at many events that I've attended over the years, and specifically the last 5 years. It still happens, even though you're listening to this probably like, oh, we have this figured out. It still happens where the show organizer sends it too late. And to be honest, like to me, I don't want to go back to your show because that is valuable to me as an exhibitor, spending money. And then you're going to be the first person who dials me up to say, hey, Kristen, we're missing you in our exhibition budget, or this year I didn't see you on the list. And that's the first feedback I'll give you. So one, that post-event threading is super important. We have a timeline that we always go through and make sure that's, segmented and important. But I will say you follow up within 24 hours or less. Sometimes my leadership now and some of my leads, they follow up day of, like as soon as they lead, send them a quick email. Let's set up the discussion. We'll ping you on Monday when you're back. So important.
Yeah. Kristen, are you guys getting to the point where you're ever booking demos, essentially creating that follow-up right then and there, where let's say you meet someone and they are a qualified lead, and then you go as far as saying, okay, you know what, let's schedule something for next week and we can go into more detail. Is that discussion ever happening like at the booth?
That is what has to happen at the booth. That is happening in some cases for sure, but it has to happen more. And I don't think it happens enough because people are too worried. So it's going into another tips and tricks from Kristen. So when I was at Cvent and I was, an enterprise BDR, every single person at the booth are like, oh, this is not my territory. Or, oh, this person is the best person to speak to, which is fine to get them to the right person or department, the company. Do what's in the best interest of the company, not the best interest of yourself. And that is one of the biggest tips that I can give because there's too many salespeople in the world, or, anyone else at a company being like, we can't set up this call because I'm not your person. Have the call with them and be like, I'm happy to have this call with you just to understand more of your detail. And then I'll make sure that you get to the right team. That is care. That is thinking about your customers first and not about yourself. So I understand time is valuable, but have a conversation, set up that next call for your people. And I always did that when I was at Cvent, and that transcended into my career today. So always do what's in the best interest of your peers and your organization and department, and not just about yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Our first core value at Popple is customers come first. And that's exactly what you just hit on. I also think this is so amazing talking to you. Like we could have a whole series called Tips and Tricks from Kristen.
Let's rename the podcast. You want to be a host, Kristen?
More will come out of my brain later, guys.
I love it. Well, yeah, with the interest of time, I want to wrap things up here. And Kristen, we like to wrap things up with one of Bryce's and I's favorite segment, which is called the Lightning Round. And the Lightning Round is sponsored by Popple, where Popple helps lead capture be lightning fast. With Popple, you can capture leads and sync them to your CRM faster than you can say this podcast has a sponsor. And so the way it works is very simple. We ask 3 lightning fast questions and you give 3 lightning fast responses. You can go into more detail if you want, or you don't have to. That's how it goes. You ready to play?
Yeah, love to. Probably faster than my answers I just had.
That's right. That's what lightning round is for. Let's start. First question is, what's your most memorable conference experience? And this can be good or bad.
My most memorable one was when I went to one of my biggest customers, my company's biggest customers, and mentor of mine said, he knows I used to sing a lot growing up. And he goes, you actually did karaoke. If he ends up listening to this, we end up doing karaoke with a bunch of customers and partners. And it was one of my most memorable moments. And we still talk about it today. I literally just talked about it, I think, with the team like a couple months ago. They're like, remember that time when you did karaoke in New Orleans in front of a bunch of attendees? I go, yep. And it was Whitney Houston.
I love that. Talk about bonding with your customers. Doing karaoke with them is a great idea.
And do it. If they say, Kristen, you have to do this. And then, just have to do it.
There you go. Sounds like you've got some singing skills that helped out, though. All right, next question. So it's the year 2075. We're all at a trade show. What does it look like? What are we doing? What's the technology? How are we connecting?
I think trade shows are going to evolve Massively. I don't think there's going to be very massive shows. I think digital is going to take over the world and AI. I think it's going to be I think there is going to be shows, but very much more intimate experiences and very curated experiences when it comes to who to meet with, where to discuss things, what are the right buyers and customers. And honestly, I don't think we're going to have a badge. I don't gonna think we're going to have a badge and these like big lanyards across our bodies. I think it's going to be really revolutionary and how people are, color coded or having something, wearable technology that shows like who they are when red, yellow, green. I don't know. I think it's going to we're not going to have a lot of physical things later on, 2075.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think the form factor on how people connect is going to massively change. And I totally agree that the curation is going to increase significantly and that it's almost going to be more of like all these experiences are going to be with the ideal seller and the ideal customer.
Well,
And it's going
I
to,
think about it just not as like a show that you attend. There's so many events that are happening around a show. Like people go to a city that they know a show is happening in, and then they have their own experience because there's usually people there that same week. That's happening more and more as we continue. But I think of lead retrieval. We talked about this, Ryan. Lead retrieval is evergreen. Like I can be on a plane and I can meet someone that is a perfect customer, right? Then I'm just scribbling down on a piece of paper, then have to take it back to my team. And there's no really record of how that came in. So I think that's going to take over the industry is it's like never not networking. You're always at networking. I know that's a double negative, but I think lead retrieval is going to be more evergreen and you're going to have more curated segmentation of how that's going to be transcribed as you do your road shows, as you do your events, because it's going to be looking very different later on.
yeah, the lead capture is going to expand much further beyond the walls of a conference or event. Absolutely. Okay, last question here. And Kristen, you did kind of mention maybe something along these lines earlier, but we'll ask anyways. What's the most important thing that's ever happened in your career?
So many important things. Oh my God, I could have a podcast just on this. I would say, I mean, there's been many different important factors in pivotal moments, but I would say my biggest one is really seek out the people you admire and get them as mentors. And even if they're not formal mentors, it could be one conversation. It could be people you keep in touch with. And I think for me, I had a mentor, and this is the most memorable one that I've talked about actually a couple times in this podcast with some advice he's given me. But he sat down with me in New York City for lunch, and I was at an organization, and he goes, "What are you doing with your career?" And I said, "Huh? Like, why are you asking that? Like, I'm very happy." And he goes, "I just see something bigger for you." And that was the first time someone actually sat down and talked to me in that way and questioned me in that way. And he goes, "This is what I'm going to do. I know you're happy and I know you love your current situation, but I'm going to connect you with about 5 to 7 people in my network. And I want you to have conversations with them." And these are some of the biggest C-suite members now at organizations. I can't tell their names on this podcast, but it would blow your mind the people he connected me with. And he's like, just have a conversation with them about their careers, what makes them tick. And it wasn't seeking a job or doing anything. That actually led to a major position that I got. One of those conversations and really changed my perspective of how to lean in and how to be curious. And I'm just really thankful for that conversation because that transcended into something that I never thought I would be good at or never thought I could get to that level so early in my career. And he really helped me see like, I am great at what I do. And I think sometimes people don't say that often is like, you're doing a great job because no one's perfect. I have my things that I need to improve upon every day, but he really saw that I could be greater faster and brought me out of my shell a bit more. So I think my biggest advice to others, since that was a long winded answer, is lean into the people that are genuinely curious about your career and also the people you admire. And even if they turn you down, don't get discouraged. It might not be the right time for them. Just continue to seek those because I've had people I connect with, they blow me off, but I also have a lot of C-suite members across different organizations, different levels, different genders, because you want different perspectives. So that's my biggest turning point is getting people that are advocating for you when you're not in the room.
Kristen, wow. What a way to bring us home to wrap it up. Just end on a high note, mic drop there. Yeah, that is incredible. regardless of whether you're in the lead capture and conference space. So thank you for leaving us with that. Is there anywhere that our audience can follow along the journey, whether it's you personally, your company, anybody you want to shout out?
I'm Kristen Koenig, 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 but it's pronounced Koenig. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always very active on LinkedIn. So you can follow me there, and then at RingCentral on LinkedIn as well, and RingCentral Events. So those are the places you can find us and find me. I'm very excited. And thank you, Ryan and Bryce, for the great conversation and listening to all my long-winded answers sometimes.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for the show. This has been incredible.
Yeah, Chris, this was awesome. This was, Bryce, we haven't even talked about it yet, but I'm sure you and I both agree this is probably the best episode we've had to date.
For sure.
So thank you so much, Kristen, for being a part of it.
Thank you, guys. And I love and admire hustlers and founders who are disrupting industries and curious. I love entrepreneurship. And even though I haven't been an entrepreneur myself, being at early stage startups and teams, I absolutely love it. So any ideas and innovation, I appreciate what you guys are doing and how you really are looking at the industry in a different way.